Funny when I have to explain it. Too much. It's-
No one knows.
Good.
Easy.
Cool. So we have Silvio.
Yeah.
And Mexica.
Yeah.
Did I say that even close to right?
It's exactly.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
And then Halima and John. Yeah. Very good.
Halima. You are, I can read names.
I mispronouncing things is one of the things. Yeah.
Camila? Camila?
Yeah, I switched the L and the I a lot.
Keep my phone.
I have that thing where I read words backwards. All right, so this is for choice. Let's do this.
heads, right? We'll choose the side, so
Con.
count.
You'll choose con, so you guys start.
Sure.
You.
When you're ready.
In this speech, my partner and I will aim to prove that on balance, non-governmental organizations are more effective than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. We'd like to start by defining keywords in our speech, starting with disadvantaged people, as groups of people that experience a higher risk of poverty, social exclusion, discrimination, and violence in the general population, including but not limited to ethnic minorities, migrants, people with disabilities, isolated elderly people, and children. Basically meaning that they are unable to be independent on their own, whether the cause for a specific struggle is due to financial, mental, physical, or environmental reasons. Secondly, we'd like to further analyze what it means to improve the lives of a disadvantaged person, as meaning to enhance in value or quality or make better. When attributed back to improving the lives of disadvantaged people, it is done by giving disadvantaged people the means and resources necessary to survive independently on their own. By the word effective, we mean producing a decided, decisive, or desired effect. And when attributed back to the context of its use, it can be inferred as causing a change in a disadvantaged person's life for the better, whether financially, mentally, or physically. Lastly, we define an NGO as a non-profit-making, voluntary, service-oriented, or development-oriented organization who work to provide aid or create a change in a specific area, community, or situation, as they're divided into operational NGOs or advocacy NGOs. The first contention of our speech is that NGOs are able to devote themselves to issues that occur across longer time periods. Examples of these range from issues such as climate change or malaria prevention. NGOs tend to have a high degree of public trust, which can make them useful for the concerns of society. The American Red Cross is a prime example of an NGO that seeks to help disadvantaged people. During natural disasters, they are said to respond to an average of 62,000 disasters every year, responding to an emergency every 8 minutes. Their disaster rescues range from natural disasters such as hurricanes to earthquakes. While the government in the US provides aid to states affected by hurricanes after the disaster has taken place, they fail to provide aid to the people who are surviving during the midst of the disaster. The second contention of this speech is that NGOs are able to mediate between individuals in ways that governments do not. In Kenya, one of Africa's many corrupt countries, Oxfam initiated the emergency drought recovery and became imperative in community management of water, pastures, and arid areas. Furthermore, they provided aid in Somalia and Ethiopia, which a total of 10.7 million people were facing severe hunger. Volunteers from Oxfam carried families on buses and transported them to areas in which they would be able to live in better conditions and help rebuild their homes. Without Oxfam's interference, the percentage of deaths in the mentioned countries would have increased due to the lack of efforts from the governments to provide any aid to their people. The third contention of the speech is that NGOs are able to pinpoint specific issues and offer personalized and specific aid to disadvantaged people. In the Middle East and North Africa region, trafficked migrants remain a huge challenge that governments in the mentioned region have yet to overcome. PAVE, an NGO that targets Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Sardinia, and Lebanon, aims to supply necessary help for vulnerable migrant workers. Ever since the release of the project, approximately 89 of 150 reported victims have received assistance. For the reasons mentioned, it is clear that governments have not made enough efforts to trump the benefits of NGOs in the world, and NGOs are more successful at improving the lives of disadvantaged people.
Judge, are you ready?
Almost.
Okay.
You may begin.
You guys ready?
Yes.
Okay. The narrative would like to begin the debate today by rebutting a few points made by the affirmative. We'll go case by case. So they had mentioned the Red Cross as an NGO dealing with natural disasters and disaster relief. But we just like to ask the question: how many of the people did the Red Cross impact were disadvantaged people? Since natural disasters affect all people, disadvantaged or not, and we'd like to see some hard statistics and evidence showing that the Red Cross specifically helped a certain proportion of disadvantaged people. Seeing that it's important in the resolution that we see NGOs are more effective in counseling the lives of disadvantaged people. They also give the example of Oxfam operating in Africa and Somalia and Ethiopia, and they mentioned that there were 10 million or so people impacted, the 10 million or so people who in some sort of humanitarian crisis. But we would like to see exactly how many people did Oxfam help. They just mentioned the operations that Oxfam conducts, but not exactly the number, the scope, and the scale of their operations in Africa. So we'd like to see further evidence of that. And they also mentioned PAVE as an NGO helping vulnerable migrant workers in Egypt, Jordan, etc. If we got that right, they had mentioned 189 people or something of that sort. We'd like some clarity on the exact impact of PAVE and where they got the source, where they're getting these statistics from, the source for that and the credentials. We begin by presenting some arguments to support our own case that governments are more effective than NGOs and improving the lives of disadvantaged people due to the scope and scale at which they can operate. We'll present 4 arguments to this debate, and we'll start with Social Security in the United States, which is a poverty alleviation scheme and welfare program for the elderly. According to AARP, an American think tank to do with social insurance, Social Security is a critical federal program that promotes income stability among millions of households in the United States. It does so by providing a steady stream of income to replace wages lost due to retirement, disability, or death. About 1 out of 6 Americans, 57 million people, receive Social Security benefits, including 9 out of 10 individuals aged 65 and older. According to another piece of evidence from the National Academy of Social Insurance, before Social Security in 1934, roughly 1/2 of seniors was estimated to be poor. Today, were it not for Social Security, the senior poverty rate would be 43.5%, and just over half of elderly African Americans and Latinos. Based on this evidence, we can see the massive impact Social Security has had in alleviating poverty for the elderly community and senior citizens, and the impact government has in improving the lives of such disadvantaged people who are no longer capable of working. We would also like to provide an example from a developing country such as India, showing on balance that governments are able to operate effectively throughout the world. And this has to do with a housing for all scheme called the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. According to the Economic Times, the most reputable newspaper in India, the government has approved an investment of close to $6.4 billion for construction of 6.83 million houses for urban poor, including central assistance commitment of $1.5 billion by April 2016. Out of that number, a total of 8.8 million houses have been built against a total demand of 11.2 million as of 29th August 2019. This shows that the Indian government fulfilled a massive need for slum development and providing affordable housing to the poor, disadvantaged people. Another piece of evidence supporting this claim is a report from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs in November 2019, which states this mission has 4 components: slum redevelopment, affordable housing through credit-linked subsidies, and affordable housing in partnership with private and public sector companies. Additionally, the government has announced that the GST rate, which is a taxation on property applicable on home loans, will be further reduced from 12 to 8%, providing alleviation to the poor, disadvantaged people who cannot afford to pay these tax rates and are actually receiving subsidies from the government to make their lives better. Thank you.
Have 3 seconds.
So each team should have 2 minutes. So,
And we each get 2 minutes.
Yeah, we each get 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay. Wouldn't you say that America is able to provide social security because the government has the sufficient amount of resources necessary, whereas other governments in the world do not?
We actually provided 2 examples, one of America and one in India. So we believe that on balance, governments around the world, whether in developing or developed countries, can provide aid to their citizens and improve the lives of disadvantaged people wherever they may be. You had mentioned the Red Cross and natural disaster relief, but seeing that all people, regardless of being disadvantaged or advantaged, are affected by natural disasters, how many disadvantaged people specifically were impacted by the Red Cross in their operations?
Well, in one of our definitions, we say disadvantaged people as people who are affected by environmental natural disasters. So that's why we use the American Cross. By using Social Security as your example, are you claiming that all elderly people are disadvantaged?
The elderly community is an at-risk community because they no longer have the ability to work, and thus Social Security replaces an income source that otherwise would have been lost to them. And we had mentioned that the poverty rate in the elderly community would have been significantly higher if not for this program. So yes, we do believe the example stands. So you mentioned the Red Cross and how all victims of disasters are disadvantaged people. So how many people exactly did the Red Cross impact? Like how many people were impacted by their operations?
I don't have that source open right now, but we can do it in the next speech. So according to a source by Lewin, there are approximately 1.77 million homeless people in India. So how has the housing strategy that the new government used alleviated the lives if there are still so many homeless people?
Okay, so as of August 29, 2019, out of the demand of 11.2 million houses for the urban poor, 8.8 million have already been built, and this program is set to expire 2022. So there's still 3 more years for the government to conduct this program, and hopefully by then it would be accomplished. But a majority of the work has already been done. That's why we see this is amazing progress and improving the lives of disadvantaged people. You also mentioned Oxfam in Africa. Where exactly is your source for the operation of Oxfam, and how many people did they impact in Somalia and Ethiopia and other countries?
Can I know that?
Right, yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
I have any other questions.
You also mentioned WAVE, an NGO operating in Egypt, Jordan, etc., impacting vulnerable migrant people. How many people exactly did they impact? I didn't catch the number.
Okay, so the victims would go report themselves to the NGO. So there were approximately, like last year, there were 150 people who reported that they needed help. And so approximately 89 out of the 100 people were able to receive assistance.
Seeing that you're mentioning figures such as 89 out of 150, do you think that the scope of this one NGO affecting 100 to 150 people is comparable to the millions of people affected by governments in the examples that we have given?
Well, the NGO is still.
Guys.
I think they get it.
I think I need to finish.
Finish the question.
It's 7 seconds past. So
Okay.
that's fine.
We give 30 seconds.
Yeah.
journal. Time.
Seconds.
Okay. Judges ready?
When you are.
In this debate, my partner and I will aim to prove that the resolution that on balance, non-governmental organizations are more effective than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. Firstly, NGOs are able to devote themselves to an issue that occurs across a longer period of time. Secondly, NGOs are able to mediate between individuals in ways that governments do not. And thirdly, NGOs are able to pinpoint issues and offer personalized and specific aid to disadvantaged people. NGOs such as the American Red Cross have been rescuing people from natural disasters for years now, as previously mentioned. But there are other NGOs that have been able to devote themselves to long-term issues and create a sustainable change, such as Zana Life. Zana Life is an NGO that has transformed the lives of many young girls in Kenya who do not have access to healthcare or proper education on certain matters such as menstruation. The latest initiative was to create sanitary products that young girls in Kenya would have access to, as well as a health education curriculum adopted from the adolescent reproductive health and skills life curriculum. The curriculum provides these young girls with a 24-session lesson in which the young girls who had no access to this information were not provided with necessary education, as well as access to sanitary menstruation products that they could use. Zana Life is a long-term NGO as they have set up headquarters in Kenya to ensure that young girls always have access to the necessary products. NGOs such as Oxfam are able to connect with people and step in when help is needed. Another NGO that is successful in doing so is the Catholic Relief Service, which is one of the largest NGOs based in the US, with providing services of public policy, agriculture, education, emergency response, food security, health, HIV, AIDS, microfinance, peace building, social safety, and water sanitation. Their long-term projects sometimes last for more than 20 years. Catholic Relief Services work all over the world and manage to provide personalized assistance in whatever country they are in. Recently, they've begun working in Jordan and have supported 68,000 Syrian and Iraqi refugees and poor Jordanians. Their services have ranged from basic health and psychosocial services, education, and basic emergency services. In Jordan, they provided aid for a total of 144,631 people. CRS also provided legal assistance for migrant workers in need of protection, which is similar to the NGO PAVE mentioned in our first speech. On the topic of Oxfam, our opponents asked us for the source of Oxfam, and that's the non-governmental organizations and influence foreign policy. As for PAVE, it's the Journal of World Day Trafficking in Persons. The opposing team argued that government's implementation of Social Security in the US and the Indian housing strategy are examples of governments benefiting disadvantaged people. However, our arguments prove that the Social Security implementation, which is most evident in the US, was primarily effective to people that were in elderly age, not necessarily making them all disadvantaged. Therefore, we stand by the resolution that, on balance, non-governmental organizations are more effective than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. Thank you.
Can we have 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Alright. It kind of feels good.
Time. Is that ready?
Certainly.
Okay. So to begin with, the con would like to rebut the claims made by the pro. We'll go case by case. To begin with, they mentioned the source that we had asked them for about the Red Cross, but we had specifically asked for numbers and hard statistics, and they simply mentioned the name of the source, so we do not know what the real impact was. Secondly, the same applies for Oxfam. They simply mentioned the name and did not give us a specific number for Somalia and Ethiopia. They also did not tell us how the government failed or did not help people, and considering the pro has a burden of proof, they are meant to compare NGOs are more effective than governments, and simply stating the effectiveness of NGOs does not prove their argument. They also mentioned that PAVE has helped 89 out of 150 people in Egypt and other Middle Eastern countries. But considering that the resolution is on balance, the question I pose is how many is 89 out of 150 in the global scale of things, considering we are talking about the scope of this entire argument. They also mentioned Zana Life, but they mentioned young girls being helped in Kenya, but they did not give us a specific number of girls that were helped, so we do not know if this applies. They also mentioned Syrian refugees, 68,000 were helped, but considering the millions of Syrian refugees, again, how much is the scope of this? And they did not mention how the government specifically failed in this, which is what they are meant to do. They also rebutted our social security claim and said that the elderly are not disadvantaged. But in their definition, considering they are the pro, they stated that the elderly count as disadvantaged. And we are simply complying by their definition, thus proving that the elderly are disadvantaged. They also said in their definition that disadvantaged people are any people who do not have financial aid or are poor, etc. And we clearly gave hard statistics, 3 sources to prove that the elderly were at a risk of poverty, and this poverty was alleviated by Social Security in the US, thus making this example stand. A Housing for All example was also not attacked, thus proving that the Indian government was effective in providing 8.8 million houses to citizens by 2019. We would now like to start our third argument, which is about the National Healthcare Service in the United Kingdom. So according to a reputed article by The Conversation, before the 1900s, healthcare was mainly provided by charities, poor law, and an unregulated private sector. However, after 1948, it moved to a highly effective mixed economy of mutual payment schemes, local authority services, etc. According to a reputed article by the BBC, the National Healthcare Service came to life on 5th July 1948. It was the first time anywhere in the world that completely free healthcare was made available on the basis of citizenship rather than the payment of fees. There are now 1.7 million people employed by the health services across the UK, making it the 5th largest employer in the world. There are now 10 times as many people working for the health services as there were before it was created. People now live 13 years longer or have 20% longer life expectancies than they did before the creation of the National Healthcare Service. This clearly shows how the NHS in the UK has proven effective not only to help disadvantaged people and increase their life expectancy, but it is also one of the largest employers in the world, thus helping the economy on a scale in general. Just to reinforce our arguments, the call provided 3 examples: Social Security in the United States, the Housing for All scheme in India, which is a developing country, and the National Healthcare Service in the UK. All these 3 prove that governments have proven effective in helping disadvantaged people. The pro, on the other hand, has simply spoken about the effectiveness of NGOs and not compared it to governments, which is what the burden of proof says they must do. They have also not given us a viable scope for which to compare whether it is on balance to show whether the impact was enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you guys ready? Oh, yeah.
So, in your speech, when talking about NGOs that are when refuting our claims about NGOs that were helping children in Kenya, you claimed that we did not provide any examples of governments that were actually helping the kids in Kenya to provide a comparison between them. Would you not agree that it is actually our job in this debate to prove that NGOs are, that it's your job to prove that NGOs are failing and our job to prove that they're succeeding, not our job to prove that governments are failing, saying that we're the pro side?
No, because our job is to prove that governments are more effective and to refute your claim. And the pro has the burden of proof. The resolution states that NGOs are more effective than governments. And as a pro, you are supposed to compare NGOs to governments to show that NGOs are more effective. Thus, simply stating the effectiveness of NGOs does not scale up to government failure. Considering you said that PAVE had 89 out of 150 people, wouldn't you agree that this isn't a large enough number in the larger scale of things? And considering the resolution says on balance, this does not really make an impact?
I would agree that the number in the scale of all people that were affected by it that is the lower number. However, for the amount of people that PAVE actually helped, when taking that into consideration, it almost like matched up to a total. I can get you statistics on that later on. Wouldn't you say that the US is able to provide more like social security benefits to their people, and the UK, and a developing country like India now, because they're all first world countries, and because they're able to provide things like social security, unlike a third world country, which you provide no examples of them as a third world country being able to be more effective than NGOs.
India is a third world country. It's not a first world country. Because according to a report by the World Bank, India has a large percentage of people living in extreme poverty, thus proving that India is a third world country.
However, it's developing.
Yes, but it's not a first world country, as you stated.
Developing more than somewhere that NGOs have helped, such as Kenya, which we've talked about. Developing more than a lot of other ones, such as the Syrian refugees that we've talked about.
But the resolution says on balance. We've given two balanced sides. We've given developing countries and developed countries to show that not only do governments work in both of these.
And we've given non-developed, developing. What about any non-developed countries that are specifically third world? Like completely. Not ones that are developing on track to be more sustainable in the future.
Well, India is not a developed country. It's still a third world country by statistics provided by the World Bank, thus making this example stand. And you provided examples of third world countries, but you did not tell us how the government failed, thus not proving these claims.
So far, my partner and I have aimed to prove that on balance, non-governmental organizations are more effective than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people by being able to devote themselves to issues that occur across longer time periods, taking control over situations that governments do not take control over, and offering specific and personalized aid to the disadvantaged. Our opponents have sources regarding some of our claims. Our source for Oxfam was a report released by Oxfam, as well as a report released by a poverty source from Business Insider, which has stated that they managed to help 53% of the people in Kenya suffering from the drought. Our opponents have failed to negate any of our claims we mentioned about American Red Cross, Oxfam, and PAVE, and Zena Life, and only focus on our numbers. Going back to Zena Life, the NGO provided sources for over 2,000 girls in Kenya. And considering the numbers for CRS, the number of Syrian refugees in Jordan is over 1 million, and the NGO goes around different refugee camps and have since helped 144,631 people in Jordan, as the government has not provided aid for these refugees except for providing them with refugee camps that are overcrowded and underfunded. Going back to PAVE, PAVE ensured that the people working in the NGO went for specific training. Training in this area included staff who work directly with migrant workers in various capacities, even working with lawyers, counselors, outreach workers, and protection officers. Whereas the government did not produce any efforts to support them, and this is according to Lebanon's General Security Department. Also, going back to the argument of the drought in Oxfam, my partner and I discussed in Somalia, in which Oxfam health was affected by the issue. It is important to say that Oxfam found 25% of the population acutely malnourished. As the issues of the drought worsened, the percentage was up to 30%. Oxfam stated that they had seen little support from the government, especially considering the protests that they had witnessed. The drought had gotten too extreme to the point where animals were dying of hunger, and the people and the civilians had lost their livestock, and the government produced zero efforts to support their people. This aims to further prove how the government was not helping at all in the drought. Therefore, we stand by the resolution.
So the affirmative has provided a number of reports and sources for their claims, but we still have yet to see specific numbers for some of the claims. They have given us numbers such as 2,000 people in Kenya for Zana Life, or 1 million people in Syria, and for PAVE they've given us 89 out of 150. These are some numbers that we can work with, but we still have yet to see specific numbers for the Red Cross. They've given us the report that they're citing from, but we don't know the scope and the scale of the impact of the Red Cross. And as for the other sources, the other claims which they did give numbers for, we see 2,000, we see 89 out of 150, we see in the Syrian refugees case we see 68 to 144,000. These numbers, even though well back they have sources for these claims, they simply do not compare with the evidence that we have given for the scope and scale at which governments can operate. Thus, seeing that the resolution is on balance, NGOs are more effective than governments. Although these NGOs have been effective in limited cases in the countries they operate in, they haven't been more effective than government. Seeing government has the ability to improve the lives of many more millions of disadvantaged people. In fact, we provided 3 examples of this, both in developing countries and developed countries. The affirmative questioned whether India was a developing country or not, and whether our case stands because it's on balance. But according to the World Bank, India's median wage, a daily wage is $2.5, which is the definition of extreme poverty. This is not to say that there aren't advantaged people in India and the entire country is poor, but it is an extremely poor country, it is developing, and we have still shown that governments in those cases can improve the lives of disadvantaged people. Thus, like on balance, governments are more effective than NGOs, and they are still yet to give comparable statistics showing how NGOs are more effective than government. Thank you.
We have 30 seconds.
Yeah. They've asked for time.
Oh,
I think
we have, don't we have a minute 30 left because we asked for 15?
Yeah.
Okay, and this will be a
They asked for time. So you,
Yes.
you're good.
Time.
Shall we begin?
The American Red Cross has provided aid for 150,000 people in the past 2 years during natural disasters where the government did not. Wouldn't you agree that that's enough to show how the government was ineffective?
In which country was this?
This was in America during natural disasters.
In America.
Yeah, the American Red Cross.
So the American Red Cross had 150,000 people for 2 years when
In the past 2 years during natural disasters. Where the government
which
did not.
natural disaster was
I'm
this?
not sure.
So we can't really comment on this claim because we don't know specifically what natural disaster we're talking about, where this happened, what time period, what the capability of the government was. So unless you can show us that the government actively did not help its own citizens and was incapable of doing so, and only the Red Cross was able to do this, only then would we concede that NGOs are more effective than governments in this case. Lacking that, we can only see the effectiveness of NGOs in helping people, but not them being more effective than government. Like I asked you a question, you have provided examples such as PAVE and Zana Life, which you have conceded have are effective, but not effective to the scale of government, considering that they have only operate in the scale of 189 or 2,000 So how do you say that NGOs are more effective than government, considering that they can operate at a much smaller scale?
Well, I would say that the government's not doing anything at all. So it's better for, yeah, maybe it's a small number with paid, but it's better than nothing at all. Because the government was not producing any efforts. And going back to the 2000, also that was the government in Kenya, in which they were not providing any help at all for the girls in Kenya who were not receiving adequate education or resources necessary. And also in CRS, like the government has only provided the Syrian refugees with refugee camps that are now underfunded and overcrowded, whereas the NGOs such as CRS have actually provided aid, but the government have not.
Towards the beginning of your first contention speech, where you stated that if people were I'm trying to remember the exact source for this. People were affected by environmental issues. I'm trying to remember the source exactly. Okay. No, because you mentioned something about people that were affected by environmental issues and the government's being able to help those people that are affected by or we mentioned that, and you said that
So what exactly? Oh, you know, sorry.
Time.
All right, are we ready for the final focus?
Yeah.
That's you guys. Unless you want to take your last 30 seconds. All right, Yala.
Yep. Judges ready?
Yep.
Okay. My partner and I believe we won this debate because we were able to prove that on balance, non-governmental organizations are more effective than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. We argued using various examples of NGOs that have shown long-term effects in areas they have worked in, such as Oxfam, PAVE, CRS, and so on. We are able to prove that our contentions concerning sustainability, solidity, and reliability of NGOs were true. Our opponents argued that governments are more effective than NGOs at improving the lives of disadvantaged people by using examples of the US Social Security, India Housing Strategy, and UK helping disadvantaged people. However, we were able to refute their arguments by saying that their main examples are from developing countries and developed countries with stable governments that have higher budgets than non-developed ones, which we brought up in ours. Also, while taking this into consideration, the amount of budgets, the US specifically, and the UK were able to allocate more resources due to their higher budgets to being able to help disadvantaged people at a greater extent. Unlike non-developed countries, like the ones we brought up, where NGOs had to step in order to specialize in specific things, in order to get the task done and in order to help disadvantaged people more. So, in conclusion, our opponents were unable to negate the claims that, on balance, non-governmental organizations are more effective than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. Thank you.
Could we have a remaining time?
Nice.
Are you gonna do?
I don't know. I don't even know. I figured I'd look at it. This isn't supposed to be here.
Yeah, and then, yeah,
I don't know. I have. Or next.
I'm getting something about this. That was last time in the paper. Time.
Okay, draft ready.
You
So the con would like to begin by stating why we believe we have been more effective in proving this resolution, that governments are more effective than NGOs. To begin with, the resolution states that on balance, NGOs are more effective than governments. And while the Pro has provided examples of NGOs where they have been effective in limited cases, they have not compared this to the effectiveness of governments, which is what the whole purpose of the debate is. They've simply given us figures which tell us about how NGOs have helped people in specific countries, but they have not specifically detailed how governments have failed. And considering the scope of their figures, they've given us figures such as 89 to 150, 2,000 people in Kenya, 68,000 refugees out of the 1 million Syrian refugees. This clearly shows the small scale that the NGOs operate at. These figures pale in comparison to the figures given by the CON, where we've stated the millions of people that have been aided by these government initiatives. The Pro also attacked our argument saying that we've given developed countries and developing countries, and we've only given countries such as the US and the UK. But they themselves stated that disadvantaged people are everywhere. This clearly shows that whether it's a developed country or a developing country, there are still people that require aid. And we have provided third world countries such as India and also first world countries where the government has helped millions on a global scale. This is a much larger figure as compared to the numbers given by them. The resolution states that on balance, NGOs are more effective than governments. And the CON believes that considering the scope of our arguments and considering the strong sources we've provided as compared to the small figures and the Pro not providing any evidence of governments being ineffective as compared to NGOs, this is why the CON believes that we have been more effective in this debate and why we believe we won. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I go. I don't know. Great. Like you probably have a few minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for your time. Thank you. Nice seeing you. Yes, cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.